Yes, hello everybody. My name is Rik Turnbull. Just for now, I'm going to walk you through the Meta Spatial SDK and Android Studio. Now, I'm going to do a full-on tutorial for the whole thing, but hopefully I'll be able to give you an introduction and walk you through, how to get started to allow you to get going on your projects. First of all, you need to set the scene. What exactly is Meta Spatial SDK? So this is Meta's description of it. It's a Spatial SDK, a new way to build immersive apps for Meta Horizon OS. And I think largely I see it as a way to be able to use Android Studio and the Android ecosystem to build immersive apps for the Quest headset. I think if you've got some knowledge already within mobile development, or you're familiar with Kotlin, some of the languages and tools and libraries, then this is kind of a great way to start building immersive apps or immersive versions of your apps. And I think as well, there's like a path, which I'm going to walk through shortly, whereby, you can take any existing app that you might have built and then kind of extend that by start adding some spatial features in there, and then adding on and iterating on that to build out a immersive version of it. Now, as an example, this is a sample I'll be using later. It's one of Meta's media samples. So you can see that kind of on the left, there's a mobile application, a traditional kind of 2D screen. This particular app allows you to scroll through different categories and then click on a movie, and then it will play. So you're kind of on the left is kind of an app that you kind of might be familiar with. And then on the right is kind of a first immersive version of this application. And you can see that on the right, is basically what's happening is that all the UI components that are used in the mobile application are actually being applied to the immersive version without actually changing any of the underlying code. So within the Meta Spatial SDK, you can create panels, and within panels, you can add your existing components in there. And you can see it's obviously a much bigger canvas to work with. I can see the whole set of categories at once and scroll through. I also have kind of some interactions. You can scroll this remotely using the controller as well, and it's in a much more immersive environment. As you'll see, it kind of works well, especially for playing the videos. Now, I think, of course, if you're moving into building XR applications, perhaps you want to reimagine some of your application, within 3D space and change some of the interactions to make it different rather than kind of just place the panels on there. But I think this way of starting is a good way to get going and then start introducing some of those components later. But I think even in its own right, the UIs that you can build with Android Studio, using standard like views and layouts and all their components for web views and lists and buttons and all those kind of things, actually create really good UIs inside XR. So, even if you're not moving an app across, you can create, panels for games or settings panels or whatever. So I think some of the UI components in the SDK can look really good, I think, on the headset. Now, if you're not necessarily looking to port an application or don't go that direction, then you can go straight into building an XR mixed reality application at the beginning. And the Spatial SDK basically provides you with access to Meta's libraries to control the headset in various ways. And some of these like standard XR capabilities and that you might find in other toolkits as well, but they're just like presented in a slightly different way. So I think the interaction SDK, which is basically for your controllers and hands, mostly those things will work out of the box. So for example, when you create the panel version of the XR app, immediately all the buttons click with the controller. I can scroll bars, move things around. Even without a controller, I can use hands to do that as well. But then you can move a step further, add grab interactions in there to move components around. And also you can see on the bottom left, after Meta Connect with the new Ray-Ban glasses showing off micro gestures to move the UI around, you can use micro gestures as well. If left, right, up, down, click with thumbs, and that's really kind of just like a few lines of code to be able to add that in as well. It's kind of easy thing to do to add to your app and looks really good. And then we've got the pass-through camera access. So you don't need the VR environment. You could take components away and show the users where they are in their real surroundings. And taking that step further, you've got access to the camera itself. So you can take frames of the camera or video, send that through to AI, run some computer vision algorithms or some image understanding, receive a response and react back as well. So, there's access to the camera where you can do great things with inside the user's environment. I think, and also to sort of create a more grounded experience, I think, for the user as well, is access to the spatial anchors and the scene understanding. So typically with a headset, after you've drawn a layout of your room, this mesh becomes available to your application. So you can see on the right, there's some debugging going on where there's colliders, and the ball has physics adding to it. So I'm missing the targets on purpose to show that it's like bouncing off the wall. But you can add colliders in there. It can recognize a room mesh. You could sort of re-skin the room, or you could find stable surfaces to place objects on, or replace paintings and things like that. So the kind of scene understanding, is part of the SDK, and there are other features in there as well. Now, just to dive slightly into how you might code this. So the Spatial SDK uses the entity component system, which is kind of a general architecture that's used for kind of most game engines. So the immersive web SDK has the same kind of idea. But essentially it means that your spatial app consists of like 3 independent layers. So on the right, if you see the drone, it would be making a sound, but imagine it's buzzing around, playing sound. And then when the user selects that ball or that sphere and moves that around, then the drone is kind of following it in there. So in that scene, then the drone can be considered like the entity. So in here, it's kind of a model, which, you can import models from other apps, favorite tool for building models, import those into a scene, perhaps with animations on them already, but then add components to give that behavior. So the components effectively represent the state of that entity whilst it's inside your application. So the kind of built-in ones are things like the mesh location, whether it's grabbable or not. If it is grabbable, like what parts and how that behaves. A transform, which is its position in 3D space and its angle, and then audio parts as well. So if you like, the component kind of represents the state of a particular entity, and it can be added to multiple ones and shared. But most of all, you can create your own. So in this sample, and all these samples, by the way, are available for you to check out in Meta's GitHub. I've got a link later. But in this one, there's a look at target component, a follow target component, which is attached to the drone. So this is essentially a component that's attached to the drone, and it says follow the sphere. And then what happens is there are systems. So the bottom layer we've got here, the bottom layer, which is kind of your game loop, is always running and updating and reading these components. So you have like the standard rendering and audio layers, but also your custom ones. So in this case, the follow target system would basically find all the components with a follow target, entities with a follow target component on it, find what that target was, work out its location, and then change the location of the original item to follow it. So essentially, these layers are what you're using to build up the interactions that you see here. And I think it'll become clearer when I show you an example. So the Spatial SDK has some built-in components as well. So these are kind of like core standard ones that you can use. And there's more to do with physics and other ones there as well. Okay, so as far as the tools that we're using, so in the example that I have here, I've got Android Studio. So I've got Narwhal, are we pronouncing that? Narwhal 3 feature drop installed. Now, that's not the latest one, but as of last time I checked, it's the one that's supported by the Meta Horizon Studio plugin. So I have that installed so that I can show that plugin. Now, you don't need it, but it is quite useful for debugging your scenes once things are running as well. The main thing that you really need is the Spatial Editor. So if you think of it, the way that Android Studio kind of helps you develop 2D apps, and the way that you can design for different layouts, you can actually visualize what that might look like on different mobile devices. So it's giving you kind of like the editor view of your panels and views. So the Spatial Editor is kind of Meta's 3D equivalent of that. So where you build the scene and what that actually looks like when it's launched, and how objects appear in there. So I'm going to demo some of these now and show you how this works. Okay, so I've got this media app sample. Just give me a sec. Which is what I showed you with the spoiler alert before. So before I walk through how some of this works, just to explain what I was saying earlier. So this is the media app sample with the list of movies that you can play in both modes. I was saying before, you can basically work in the same project and build an app that targets mobile and one that targets the Quest device. So inside the source tree here, where there's an activity, so the activity is kind of the main component of the Android application. And essentially, this is the part that's building the lists and the parts that are like playing the video. So like these are actually shared components using standard Android APIs to build that as well. Now, within the mobile app, then this is then shared between the mobile version and the Quest version. So there's a folder here. So the only thing that's different in the mobile version is the manifest file, so the setup for the application, which is telling it to run the main activity when it launches. Now, within the Quest version of this, there's a whole load of permissions that need to be set up in order to access some of the components in the headset. So a lot of these, these are kind of standard settings that you will need anyway for the VR apps to work. And then this will launch the immersive activity by enabling VR mode immediately, and then launching this as the default. And what happens is I can build for either mobile or Quest, but I can do it within the same project using different build variants. And I can show that here. So there's build variant settings. So this is all set up as part of the build in here. So if you set this to mobile debug and then play this, now this will launch the. Oh no, that's launched it on my headset. I don't want to do that. So I can launch this on the emulator with the phone. I'll give it a minute. It's launching at the moment, launching the app. Still launching. Okay, here it is. So these are kind of randomized lists, but you can see it's kind of a mobile app. You can like scroll up and down, like look at what's popular, click on a movie, then it's gonna play it as well. So yeah, it's like a few lists, world's smallest Netflix. Sorry. So that's kind of like the web, the mobile version of the application. Now, if I run this in the Quest headset, so I'll just check this is all good. So I've changed the mode to be Quest. Okay, and then if I cast, if it's playing nicely. Oh, wait a minute. I think this happens because there's a word of warning. The Meta Quest Developer Hub will identify Android devices. So it's basically trying to launch it on the emulator, which would be an interesting thing. I'm just going to stop this device a minute. It causes me a headache. Okay. Right. Let's try that again. Yeah. Excellent. So we've got that working. So now if I check this to Quest and launch this on the headset, then, okay, hopefully you can see the same thing. It's like the same application, but now it's huge. Obviously everything kind of fits on the screen fine. Also, I'm kind of in this environment where there's some assets and skybox, and then from here I can kind of scroll through the list as I did before. So I'm doing this sort of with hand controllers, and I can run through and show it as before, but now I've got a big cinema screen, and the sound's kind of playing through the headset, which is pretty cool. Let's go back. Yeah, okay, so that's kind of what that version looks like. I might temporarily stop casting just to save my PC. So what I want to show you is what this kind of looks like in the Spatial Editor. Now, sometimes the Android Studio will launch you in kind of Android project mode, but I find it easier to work in project files because some of the components, are kind of Meta Quest specific. So they don't always show up. But one thing you can do is look at the Spatial Editor component. So there's a Metaspatial file here. So I have Metaspatial SDK installed. So if I launch it with the external associated application, that should launch. Now, okay, zoom out. So there we go. We can see that it's essentially what we were looking at in the VR environment. Now it's quite a sort of simple setup for this application. There's not a lot in the scene. but I think it's enough to kind of explore. So I think the scene itself is composed of a panel and an environment. So the environment is actually made up of a particular fixed asset. So we can look at the asset. It's, composed of several meshes and, the material. So inside the Spatial Editor, you can load other assets to use in your scenes. So this is a standard model, but if you build them in other tools, then you can download files in different formats, which can be imported into your app. So that will include the mesh and the objects and perhaps any animations that are associated with it as well. I think the panel as well is kind of a unique component because it's not really a 3D asset in the same way as many of the other components that you might have. So the panel essentially is the place where like the 2D applications are going to show up. And this is done by just giving it an identifier. So in this case, this comes from the project resource ID. So the ID is just UI example. And what actually happens is when the app sees that a panel has arrived with that name, it will then launch an activity inside that panel. So if you like, this identifier is the link between the spatial app and the 2D app and to show the panel. I think the thing to note, of course, with the 3D environment here, you can have multiple panels, in different places as well. So you're kind of not restricted to just one panel. If your app has multiple screens, you can kind of, if it makes sense, you can show them all together within the same scene. But yeah, the panel is here. So this, our kind of entity component system, then these are the entities, if you like. If you look at the environment, it does have a component actually attached. So once you have these entities built, you can attach some components yourself, to give them certain kind of properties or certain kind of behavior. So this has got the physics component attached, which effectively is going to, give it a mesh to collide properly as well. So, the typical pattern would be to import the assets and then build them out. Now we can kind of add more in here. There is a very small kind of library of existing assets that Meta have built into the application, so you can kind of prototype things and try them out. So we can kind of add a coffee table, say, to the scene or to our project, and things like, I think I was gonna add, I've lost it now. Where's my record player? Record player, and then a bit of vinyl as well. So, I mean, it totally doesn't make sense in the context of this application, but it's enough to show you what's happening. So like, the app can then allow me to kind of move, sorry, I need to pick the coffee table, to move things around. So I can place objects in the scene. So here I can move them, I can resize them, I can change the rotation like around a bit. Change the rotation. I can stick the record player on there. And maybe grab our vinyl. All right, didn't move that correctly. Okay. So, it's kind of the editing part of this. I'm just going to move it up a little bit. So yeah, so I think you can see there I can kind of, I think one thing is to put the record player as a child of the coffee table. So that means that if I kind of rotate this around, then the whole thing rotates. So it's kind of like scene editor for these 3D assets. Now, if I save this and then run the app again, start casting. And then run this again. So now what's going on in here is, okay, our table has appeared in the scene. Now, I think the main thing to note is that I didn't write any code to like do any of this. It was all kind of done in the editor, and it just appears. So what actually happens is there's a Gradle plugin that takes your saved spatial file, compiles it, and then deploys it inside the application, and that's kind of unpacked later on. Now, there is a feature called hot reloading. So I should be able to move this table to somewhere that's not under my feet. So let's shift it across here a bit and rotate it around. Move it a bit this way. Trying to grab the actual component and not see. I think there-ish. Kind of want my vinyl record over there as well. Is that on top-ish? Okay, so now if I send this to the device, if we show how quickly I can do this, but if I send this to the device, then it kind of moves. So actually, the spatial editor has kind of sent the instructions to where it should live and moved it. So this makes it a lot easier to sort of place things in the scene where you can actually see them. So instead of trying to guess where everything should live, you can kind of move these around and kind of reach that. I think the other thing I can do is, so I can kind of like, if I want to play this record, then maybe I want to grab, make it grabbable in there, send that to the device. So now I should be able to pick it up either this way. The default grabbable generally works well for panels, but for objects, there's another one that's called ISD grabbable that's got better interactions. So it can sort of work out better places to grab things a bit more accurate. You can see it's not entirely recognizing everything the best. But you can see, I can add components to this and add certain behavior. I think I could try adding physics even. Physics components in there. Send that. So what happens is when I send it, the scene kind of resets. So everything's gone. And note that the vinyl record's kind of dropped now because it's got gravity. I can't throw it because it's not set up correctly. Like Shaun of the Dead. Yeah, but you kind of get the idea how that works. Okay, let me stop some of this stuff. Okay, just stop that and stop casting. So I'm going to show you some other parts. I think if we go back to the slide. Okay. Before I sort of show you some of the code on this, I just want to explain what's there. So the any kind of immersive activity needs to subclass an app system activity, and then that means that when it's launched, you get access to these events on create, on store, on scene ready, and the kind of reverse ones as well. This is kind of shortened version. So like when everything shuts down, you will get access to these events as well. So when the on create runs, you get an opportunity to register features. So features are kind of the XR capabilities that you want to use. So that might be some physics, obviously the VR mode, but it could be the hot reloading or some other parts as well that you need to do. And then you'll register panels. So this means like the action that the Spatial SDK should take when it recognizes a particular panel ID. And then at the end, you'll register any kind of systems that control it. So there's kind of like an initial kind of base configuration that sets up. And then after on start runs, the scene is ready. So that means you're ready to put objects within the scene and start working with it. Now, there are various kind of standard setup things that you can do at that point with the scene. But the main thing is to inflate the file. So as mentioned, the file is saved inside the app from the Spatial Editor. You actually need to then inflate that object to inflate that file or multiple files really to create the object in the scene. And that actually runs in a thread in the background because some scenes can be quite big. So obviously nothing can run until all the scenes properly loaded. And then you can add things like a skybox. And then, once VR activity is ready, everything should be up and running. So it's kind of like a typical workflow of the immersive version of the app. So if I can show what this looks like for this particular application. Just hopefully it's a little bit bigger. Ooh. All right, not zooming in, but I hope you can kind of see that. So basically, yeah, so there's an app system activity here that I've subclassed to launch this. And then on create is effectively going to call my register features and panels. So this app is adding a VR feature. It's adding physics capabilities, so I can throw records around. The hot reload feature, so I can debug those. And of course, you could add these in the debug settings as well, so you won't put in a live application. And the data model inspector, which I can show you in a minute. And then it will call register panel. So this is a point where, okay, it recognizes a panel is there. And then if there's UI example panel arrives, it has this configuration. And then most of all, it has this activity class. So this is your link into your sort of 2D mobile app code, if you like, is display this in this screen. But you can also pass in like layout XML files, like different activities, and also pass in some initialization. So you can take the same panel ID, but display different things in it, depending on the data in there. So this is basically initialization. Now, after this is run, no panels appear. This is saying what happens when it actually does appear. So once the onCreate's run, you've registered any systems that you've got for your own app, and then the scene's ready. Then there's some like standard setup that you can do, center the person in the middle of your scene and sort of local floor out and do some kind of default setup. And then this activity here to launch and inflate the scene. So the scene lands in this location in your app. So this loads the scene, gives it a name of scene. And then once that's actually available, in this particular version, it's changing the shader on the environment once it's loaded. But once it's here, you can do any kind of other extra setup you need. And this part here is creating the skybox. So I think one thing we could try and do is, so when the scene's ready, we could enable pass-through, say. Then for the pass-through to work, I need to get rid of the skybox. So like this is loading this sky dome image that we saw. So I need to get rid of this here. This will kind of enable pass-through. And I think if I go back to the Spatial Editor a minute, I might kind of hide my coffee table stuff. And I also will hide the environment. So all kind of left with is this panel, but I would like to make it grabbable so I can move it around. This time I'm going to save the scene. So again, if I kind of do the casting setup again, this is going to play. And then build this app. Just check we're all good. Okay. So we can wait for this to build. Okay. Yeah. So now you can see I'm in pass-through mode. I've kind of removed that environment, but I've still got the app, and I've actually now got a component here where I can grab this, and like I could have added a resize one. I can stick it on my wall, maybe over there, and then play one of these movies on it on a big screen. So I think obviously for this, it would make more sense to add it to the scene understanding and just place it on the biggest wall or something like that. But yeah, you can set up the scene in kind of different ways and get different effects depending on how you want to do that. I think just one thing whilst that app is running, I'll just show you the data so the Meta Horizon plugin has various things for creating different templates for creating different projects and some links, but I think the main thing is the model inspector. So with a bit of luck, all right, okay, so this is kind of what you were seeing in the editor, but it's kind of all the live components. So you can see it's got the scene. I can edit these and you can move things around as well. So rather than doing them in the editor, but I can see that there are like the vinyl record's still there, but it's like not visible. Then the coffee table's in there, the record player, the environment, but then also you can access things like the position of the controllers. So you can see where they are. And also like hands, where hands are, the location of the head. So you can access, so you can either edit them in here, but you can also see what's in the scene. So that can help you in your coding as well. Yeah, so that's that one. Let me stop casting again. A minute. Okay. So that's whoops. That's kind of gone away. I think largely that's all I have to show you right now. But I think if you're interested in using this for your project or idea, then the Spatial SDK samples has got quite a sort of rich set of examples that you can use, and take to part and have a look at. They're pretty good. I also think that the tutorials and the documentation is pretty good for this as well, and quite comprehensive and up to date. So there's like the Spatial SDK introduction to how all these kind of things work, but also all the detailed information on the API calls as well. So that's pretty comprehensive. And then you can also install the new MCP server into Android Studio. So if you've got like a coding assistant, then you can install this from the MetaQuest like developer hub. So in here you could add an MCP servers into those into Android Studio as well. So you get like coding assistant, so that'll give you up-to-date feedback and troubleshooting for Spatial SDK. Yes, and I think that's all I have.